Welcome to the Narrative Mindset Podcast. If this is your first time tuning in, I would appreciate it if you went back and viewed previous episodes when you get time to get the tone. Today I want to talk about snails. It sounds like a strange choice. I know. Snails aren't dramatic. They aren't loud. And you rarely hear anyone say, "Hey, did you see that snail today?" They're quiet background creatures, almost ignored by the world. But sometimes the things we walk past without thinking or almost step on end up being the ones with the most to teach. And snails really do have a lot to teach. The more I learn about them, the more I realize how usual they are. They're slow, but they're stubborn. Soft, but protected. Fragile, but steady. A snail is basically a walking contradiction that somehow works. And the more you look at them, the more you start seeing your own habits, your own pace, your own stress reflected back at you. So in this episode, I want to explore snails from a bunch of angles. I want to look at the biology because snails are stranger than you think. I want to look at the symbolism because every culture sees something different in them. I want to talk about dreams, myths, ecology, and even the idea of slow living. I want to take something simple and overlooked and pull it apart in a way that makes it feel meaningful, even just for one moment today. So let's start with the basics. What a snail actually is. A snail is a soft-bodied creature called a gastropod, which literally means stomach foot. That sounds brutal, but it just means their body is basically one long muscle that they glide on. They move using tiny waves under their body, and they coat everything in slime so they can travel without tearing themselves apart. They basically have a soft body, a single muscular foot, a digestive system that loops inside that tiny shell, two pair of tentacles on their head, and a spiral shell they carry everywhere they go. The part most people don't know is that snails actually have thousands of teeth, not sharp ones, but tiny rows of microscopic ones on something called a radula, which works like a conveyor belt. They scrape food instead of biting it. If a snail had a catchphrase, it would be, "I'll get there eventually." The other thing people don't realize is snails can be ridiculously tough. They can sleep for years. They can seal themselves inside their shell to survive drought. Some can survive freezing temperatures. They're built for persistence, not speed. And that brings me to the part people always think about first: the slow pace. Snails are slow. That's their whole brand. But being slow isn't the same as being lazy. In fact, when you watch a snail for a while, you notice something important. They're always moving. They just refuse to be rushed. In a world that's always pushing us to go faster, a snail is a reminder that not all progress is fast. Not all progress is visible. And not all progress needs to be. A snail shows up in its own time, does what it needs to do, and keeps going. There's something calming about that, something human. When people talk about patience, they talk about snails for a reason. A snail's whole existence depends on patience, steady progress, slow decisions, careful steps, and trusting that small movements still matter. Sometimes the slowest creatures end up outliving the fast ones. Snails and self-protection. One thing I admire about snails is how quick they are to protect themselves. The moment something feels off, they pull inside their shell. They don't wait. They don't rationalize. They don't think. Maybe this won't be a big deal. They sense danger and they retreat. It's not avoidance, it's self-care. It's knowing your limits and not feeling guilty for having them. There are a lot of people who never learn how to do that. People who rush through exhaustion, push through stress, push through situations that feel wrong. A snail doesn't do that. It knows its home is on its back, and it knows that protecting that home is more important than pretending everything is fine. There's a lesson in that. There's no reward for letting yourself get stepped on. The shell. The shell is maybe the most iconic part of a snail. It's not something they pick. They're born with it. It grows with them. It's literally a part of their body. That spiral shape shows up everywhere in nature. Storms, galaxies, fingerprints, seashells. It's a shape that repeats across everything from the smallest cell to the largest cosmic structure. Some cultures see the snail shell as a symbol of that cycle. The idea of repeating patterns, rebirth, and returning to yourself. Snails don't abandon their past, they carry it. And for a lot of us, that feels familiar. We all carry our past, memories, mistakes, lessons, the things that shaped us. Some shells are smooth, some are cracked, some are heavy. But we keep moving with them. The snail reminds us that carrying your story isn't the same as being trapped by it. A snail's way of seeing things. Snails have simple eyes, used on the ends of their longer tentacles. They don't see big detail. They don't focus on faraway things. They mostly sense light and dark, shapes and movement. In a way, their world is just, is this safe? Can I eat this? Should I keep moving? It's a simple way of living, not in a dumb way, but in a grounded way. Snails don't waste time worrying about 10 steps ahead. They look at what's right in front of them. Most of us don't do that. We worry about things weeks away. We panic over what might happen. Snails don't rush the future. They deal with the moment they're in. Sometimes I think we'd all be better off if we lived more like that. The ecological side. Snails actually have an important job in the world. They recycle the things nobody wants. They break down plants, fallen leaves, and decaying things. They're tiny decomposers that keep ecosystems clean. Other animals rely on them as food. Birds, beetles, frogs, even mammals. A world without snails would fall out of balance, and most people never think about them at all. There's something humbling about that. Doing important work while remaining invisible. Snails keep the world moving quietly. They don't need applause for it. Some creatures exist to be loud and dramatic. Snails exist to keep things steady. Snail symbolism across cultures. When I think about snails and what they mean to people, I realize that almost every culture notices the same things about them: patience, persistence, quiet strength, and self-containment. It's remarkable. You'd think a creature that moves so slowly wouldn't leave a mark on anyone's imagination, but they do. They appear over and over in stories, art, and philosophy. Take the Aztecs. The spiral of the snail's shell wasn't just decoration. It represented cycles: birth, death, rebirth, life returning to itself over and over. The snail's slow pace and the spiral shape became a metaphor for the rhythm of existence, a reminder that life moves in loops, not lines. They respected the snail for that, even if it was a tiny creature in a massive world. In Europe, snails show up in folklore almost everywhere. Farmers noticed them, kept track of their movements, and sometimes used them as a kind of natural calendar. If snails were climbing, certain crops were ready to harvest. If snails retreated, it meant rain was coming or growth was slowing. They didn't need to be loud to matter. Slow and small, yet profoundly useful. In that sense, snails symbolize a kind of practical patience, observing life quietly, learning from subtle rhythms, and moving when the time is right. In Asia, particularly Japan and China, snails were associated with humility and self-containment. They carried their homes with them and retreat when threatened. People saw the snail's shell as a metaphor for personal space and boundaries, and its pace as a reminder to respect time, your own and others. In art and poetry, snails appear as symbols or quiet reflections. The lesson is simple. Don't rush. Don't try to dominate. Just move at a pace that preserves your integrity. Even in Christian symbolism, snails sometimes take on a negative association, like representing sloth, the sin of laziness. But if you think about it, the snail isn't lazy. It's deliberate. It moves carefully, steadily, in a way that guarantees survival. That perception of sloth isn't about the snail. It's about people judging what they don't understand. And in that judgment lies a lesson too. Not all slowness is failure, and not all quiet strength is obvious. Across every culture, snails share a common symbolic thread: patience, protection, and subtle persistence. They're creatures that endure, adapt, and survive quietly. And somehow, that makes them profound teachers. I keep thinking about that. We live in a world that rewards speed and noise, but snails show us something different. That the slow, the quiet, and the careful are just as important as the fast and loud, and sometimes more so. Dream meanings. I've always found dreams about snails to be curious little reminders. They're quiet, slow-moving symbols, and when they show up in your subconscious, it's rarely dramatic. It's subtle. It's the kind of message that sits there, waits for you to notice, and then quietly shapes the way you think about your life. When I dream about a snail without a shell, it usually hits me immediately. Vulnerability, exposure. It's like my mind is saying, hey, be careful where you put yourself. Some things you're carrying, some parts of you are unprotected. It's not a warning about danger from others so much as a nudge to pay attention to myself, to notice where I've stretched too thin, where I've let the world weigh me down, and to recognize that I can protect myself without needing anyone to do it for me. If I dream about eating a snail, I've noticed it tends to carry a positive vibe, the one that usually leaves me with this sense of slow reward, the idea that patient, steady efforts actually pay off. It reminds me that life doesn't have to move at a breakneck pace to be meaningful, that sometimes the small victories, the quiet, unnoticed gains, are the ones that matter. Eating the snail isn't gruesome or odd in the dream. It's absorption. It's taking in patience. It's taking in the lesson that slow, steady progress works. Collecting snails in a dream always makes me think about choices and attention to detail. Sometimes it feels good, a positive sign that I'm gathering what I need, little by little, not rushing. But sometimes it carries a warning. Pay attention to the small things, because they can slip through the cracks if you're not careful. There's always a duality. Dreams aren't about one message. They're about noticing patterns I might miss in my waking life. Killing a snail, even accidentally, leaves a mark. It's that sense of impatience or frustration coming through. I feel the guilt or the awareness that I forced something, rushed something, or failed to respect the natural pace of a situation. It's a reminder. The world moves at its own speed, and sometimes pushing too hard only breaks things that could have flourished slowly. Seeing a giant snail is a kind of dream that makes you pause. It's surreal, almost uncanny, but the meaning isn't about size, it's about magnitude. Some situation in life feels bigger than it should, overwhelming, or confusing. A snail that's too large is just a mirror for how I feel about a problem or a challenge that should be manageable. But my perception has blown it up. It asks me to step back, slow down, and observe calmly. A snail crawling on me is personal. It's intimate. Sometimes it feels like a weight or a present I can't ignore. Something slowly but persistently pressing on me. Other times, it's a comforting reminder that slow change is happening, that growth is gradual, and that patience is more than a suggestion, it's essential. A dead snail hits differently. It signals exhaustion, burnout, or neglect. Something has been ignored, or I pushed too hard without pause. The dream is a message to stop, breathe, and reset. It's not doom, it's intervention. It's a quiet tap on the shoulder saying, notice yourself before it's too late. The thing about snail dreams is that they aren't flashy. They don't scream. They don't shout. They teach the same lessons that they teach in life. Slow down, respect your pace, protect yourself, and trust that small, steady movements still matter. When I wake up from these dreams, I usually pause for a second and ask myself, where am I rushing? Where am I exposed? Where do I need patience? That's the gift of a snail appearing in a dream. It's quiet, it's subtle, and yet it can leave a lasting impression if I let it. Totems and spirit animals. I've always been fascinated by the idea of spirit animals, not as a mystical thing, but as a reflection of traits we might already carry, qualities that quietly guide us if we pay attention. And when I think about snails as spirit animals or totems, it's easy to see why they resonate with people. A snail as a totem doesn't show up to tell you to fight or to conquer. It doesn't make noise. It doesn't demand attention. It shows up to remind you to Slow down, be deliberate, and respect your own pace. If a snail has entered your awareness as a spirit animal, it's basically saying, hey, you're moving too fast. Notice the details. Pay attention to yourself and the world right in front of you. People guided by the snail often aren't the loudest or the most impulsive in a room. They observe. They notice small shifts. They catch patterns that others miss. I like to think of it as quiet wisdom, not a dramatic revelation, just steady, reliable insight. And those people, or that part of myself, when I tune in, they're resilient in ways that aren't obvious. They keep moving even when the path is hard. They survive, adapt, and endure. The snail teaches boundaries too. Its shell is a personal space, a moving home. It knows when to retreat, when to protect, and when to advance. And as a spirit guide, it reminds me that self-care isn't optional. Protecting myself isn't selfish. It's necessary. Slow, steady progress doesn't happen if I'm constantly overstimulating or letting others dictate my pace. Totems aren't about what other people think you should do. They're about what you need to notice in yourself. And the snail shows up for the patient, for the careful, for those who are willing to learn that small steps taken consistently matter more than bursts of speed. I think about moments in life when I feel stuck or behind. When a snail appears in those moments, whether as a dream, a symbol, or just a passing thought, it's a reminder that patience isn't passive, it's active, it's deliberate, it's showing up, one careful step at a time, with awareness and respect for the rhythm of life. And that's why I like the idea of snail spirit animals. They aren't flashy. They don't dominate. They teach the quiet, often unnoticed ways that endurance, patience, and self-awareness shape a life. Sometimes I imagine a snail crawling along, leaving its trail, reminding me, even slow progress leaves a mark. Even small, deliberate choices create a path worth following. And the snail asks me to trust that path, even if it doesn't feel fast enough, even if it doesn't look impressive from the outside. Slow living and the philosophy of patience. When I think about snails, I think about time differently. They move slowly, yes, but there's a rhythm to it. A snail doesn't rush. It doesn't force itself. It simply moves at a pace it can sustain. And in that pace is a lesson we all need more than we realize. Slow living matters. Slow living isn't about doing nothing. It's not laziness or avoidance. It's about choosing deliberation over hurry, attention over distraction. Watching a snail cross across a leaf, you notice the world differently. You notice the texture of the leaf, the moisture in the air, the light reflecting off the shell. There's a fullness to attention when you aren't trying to race past it. Patience comes naturally in this context. It's not a virtue preached from a book or a motivational poster. It's something you feel in your bones when you let yourself slow down. The snail reminds me that patience isn't waiting idly. It's trusting the process, respecting your peace, and honoring what is unfolding around you. I've found that living slowly changes the way you experience life. Meals aren't just fuel, they're movements. Conversations aren't just noise, they're connection. Work isn't just task, it's a craft. Every small, careful step matters. And over time, those steps accumulate into something meaningful. The snail shows me that progress doesn't have to be flashy to be real. Even in failure, the snail teaches resilience. It might retreat into its shell for days, weeks, or months, but it always emerges. It keeps moving. It survives. It persists. Slow living is similar. It acknowledges your limits, giving yourself space, and knowing that steady, thoughtful effort outlasts bursts of energy that burn out quickly. And there's something almost spiritual about that. In a culture obsessed with speed, snails ask me to reclaim my own rhythm. They ask me to notice my own energy, my own mind, my own heart, to trust that slow, deliberate steps can carry you farther than frantic rushing ever will. If I take the snail's lessons seriously, life itself becomes less of a race and more of a journey. I start seeing patience not as a virtue to be tested, but as a way of being. I notice the little things. I appreciate the quiet moments. I carry myself more carefully, with awareness, with intention. And in the process, I leave my own trail, subtle, steady, enduring, just like a snail. Slow living isn't easy. It requires vigilance, self-awareness, and courage. But it's also profoundly freeing. It's saying, I am enough, right here, right now. I don't need to hurry. I don't need to prove anything. I just need to move with care, with attention, and with patience. And that's the final lesson of the snail. Even the smallest, slowest creatures teach the deepest truths about patience, endurance, protection, and living fully in the pace that suits you. And so here we are, having spent all this time with snails, creatures most people glance past without a second thought. But that's the point, isn't it? The smallest, slowest beings often carry the deepest lessons. A snail moves at its own space. It survives by knowing its limits, by trusting its rhythm, by carrying its home wherever it goes. It doesn't compete. It doesn't show off. It just moves. And somehow, that quiet persistence, that patient endurance, teaches more than we often realize. Maybe that's the takeaway for us. To slow down, to notice the little details, to protect our own spaces, to care for ourselves, and to trust that steady, deliberate steps, no matter how small, accumulate into something meaningful. Snails remind me that life doesn't always need to be flashy. Progress doesn't always need to be fast. Sometimes it just needs to be present, patient, and persistent. And if we carry that lesson with us, quietly, steadily, maybe we can live a little more like the snail, resilient, observant, and moving forward, one careful step at a time. Thank you for tuning in to this episode of the Narrative Mindset Podcast.